so much, everyone, for joining us. I am Kaylin Wagner-Marsh. I am with Better Santa Cruz. Myself and Marvin Christie here run Better Santa Cruz, and we're an educational organization looking to educate the public on some of the issues facing Santa Cruz. And we're partnering tonight with the amazing Housing Matters. And I'll go ahead and let Marlena introduce Housing Matters, who can do a much better job than I.
Hi all, I'm not sure I use any pronouns, and I'm the Community Education Specialist for Housing Matters. So Housing Matters is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We partner with individuals and families on their pathways out of homelessness and into permanent, stable housing. Over the past few years, more than 600 people have found permanent, stable housing with the help of one of our programs. And at any given night, around 175 people stay on our campus in our shelter. We're really excited to partner with Better Santa Cruz tonight and inform you all about the intersections of foster care and homelessness.
So let's kind of set the stage. Our goal today is to educate the community about the foster care system here locally and shine light on why statistically there seems to be a high percentage of former foster youth who experience homelessness. We want to explore what that reality is, what support currently exists, and what we need to do as a community to better support our youth. So we've invited this panel to dive deep into these topics so we can leave here more educated and empowered to help. So to start us off, I want to take a moment just to share some stats. Our most recent point in time count, which is a survey that is taken on Monday at one time of the year, so once a year, and that indicates, based on our most recent one, that 23% of those surveys have been in the foster care system, which is a significant amount. Aside from foster care experience of those surveyed as a whole, 334 were unaccompanied children and transitioned aged youth between 18 to 24 years old. 99% of those were unsheltered. And according to the Children's Law Center of California, the foster youth experience rates of homelessness ranging from 11% to 38%, which is disproportionately higher than that of the general population. So when we consider the recent publication by our County of Education, more than 2,700 Santa Cruz County students are currently experiencing homelessness. Now that has a different definition than our point in time count. That is about 1 in every 14 students across TK to 12th grade, a rate 45% higher than the average statewide. So according to their numbers, they've used unsheltered and unsheltered just within their count, equated to 400 students. And that's not including those that are in motels or doubled up. So that shines light on how limited our current stats could be. So we hope to explore how we can prevent these staggering statistics, what would be preventative, supportive, and successful measures. So let's hear from our panelists, what they've seen firsthand. So with that, I will let Marcia take over.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Marcia Greenspan, Volunteer Program Manager at Housing Matters. I also I'm a facilitator along with Marlena DeCastro. We facilitate similar conversations like these at this very library monthly under the Neighbors for Neighbors meetup program. So we're really excited to be partnering with someone else doing this crucial work. So thank you, Better Santa Cruz. This event is about community building, and everybody's perspective here is welcome and important. We want to get our experts here, give them the spotlight, get us rolling in a particular direction. They'll lead the way, and then we'll open the conversation up to everyone here. We should have ample time for questions. Okay, so we have Joshua is joining us via Zoom, and maybe we'll start with Joshua. For all of our panelists, could you please introduce yourself, the program that you're representing, if you are representing a program or if you're part of a program, and then describe how you've had the opportunity to connect with the foster care system. Joshua, you want to get us rolling?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My name is Joshua, pronouns is he, they, and I am here with Housing Matters. I recently just took their training through the Speakers Bureau, which was very eye-opening and a great experience. And my experience with the foster care system is my own. I've been a part of the foster care system, not in California, but which I did give the heads up from. I'm originally from New York, so I went through a different system, but a lot of them, it just really fueled the fire for me to advocate for others.
Sure, Joshua, do you mind just sharing a little bit more about the Speakers Bureau before we pass the mic?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Speaker Bureau is a phenomenal training held by Housing Matters that connects with the community. And also what I've learned from there is actually they deal with individuals who possibly are homeless, have been homeless, or have experienced some type of homelessness. And what they do is they teach them how to they give them skills on how to public speak, storytell, and also and afterwards they get the great opportunity of being put in the right room with the right people so they can be heard and bring the awareness in the conversation and I guess escalate it better.
Amazing. Thank you for being an advocate, being here with us today.
Absolutely.
Gloria, would you like to get us started?
Sure. So my name is Gloria Carroll. I am the Child Welfare Director here in Santa Cruz County. And in reflecting about how I had the opportunity to connect with the foster care system as a child, from middle school to high school, my mother was a foster parent, both formally and informally in Contra Costa County. And I became a child welfare professional and have 28 years in the field, both in the state as a county representative, but also in federal foster care with the Children's Bureau.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Irigoyen. I'm the program director at CASA of Santa Cruz County, which is a nonprofit that offers an advocate, a court-appointed special advocate to every youth in the dependency system, aka foster care. We also serve youth in the juvenile justice system, which perhaps is a different conversation. We serve about 220 youth per year, and we give them one-to-one support to walk through their time in the system. Hi everyone, I'm Alex Domi, she, her pronouns. I am with the Housing for Health Division of Santa Cruz County. I work on a variety of different housing programs, including our Youth Homeless Demonstration Project, which helps coordinate our youth housing system response, as well as leading our Family Unification Program work group, which is really just trying to get vouchers into the hands of folks who have former or current foster care experiences and who are transitional age youth. So,
And when you say vouchers, could you explain what that means?
yeah, so a voucher is like a housing choice voucher or a Section 8 is what some people refer them to. And typically what that means is that the tenant who has the voucher pays 30% of their adjusted monthly income towards their rent. And then the housing authority of Santa Cruz County or whatever area that they're in will pay the remaining amount. And so it's a pretty amazing opportunity for folks.
Hi everyone, I'm Olivia Burt. I am she, her pronouns. I am with the County Office of Education with a program called Foster Ed, and also kind of semi-recently working with McKinney-Vento students or students experiencing homelessness, which we're referring to with the kind of doubled up sheltered, unsheltered, through the County Office of Ed. And we do education liaisons, so education case management, building capacity with students and with caretakers, biological resource families. I've been there for about 5 years, and prior to that, I worked for one of the local group homes. So for about 10 years, I was with one of our group homes, which is a whole other kind of change in systems here with community care reform, which I'm sure we'll dig into more, but actually helped with that change where we went from group homes to short-term residential treatment programs. Correct me if those words are wrong there. Sorry, I'm looking at you, Claudia. Thank you. And actually was also able to help build the program for our extended foster care with our non-minor dependents. So I've been working with foster youth for about 15 years in this county, and it's been really cool to see the kind of evolution that we're doing here.
Okay, wow, we have a wealth of experience in here. Okay, so Gloria, would you like to get us started for people in our audience who are unfamiliar with the foster care system? Could you shed some light on why this system exists and who it is for?
Yeah. So its origins are back to the 1800s, but it exists for children who have experienced child abuse and neglect. It was designed to be an intervention system so that families can get safe and stable so the children can return home. It exists originally in the 1800s, goes back to, I want to say, thinking of its origins in New York when there were tons of homeless children because of, pandemics and epidemics, smallpox and that sort of thing. It was a lot of homeless children on the streets, and it was created so that, you know, children could have a place, but they were often used as servants, you know, and placed in homes for servants. And it also has origins in resettlement of Indian children. Right now it exists, again, as an intervention system so that when children are abused and neglected, we as child welfare can intervene in the family, help provide services to help them get safe and stable so the children can come back home. It's not intended for children to be raised full-time in the system. And there are several laws, including the concurrent planning law and the permanency, adoption safe and stable families law that says, you know, children are not to languish in care, but that they deserve permanent homes. In terms of, I want to hit Olivia's point about non-minor dependents. For 17-year-olds, 17 and a half year olds, we have that age youth coming in the system. Oftentimes there is a rift in the family where like a parent-child conflict. Right now the system is 300, those who are subject to the 300 Child Welfare and Institutions Code, abuse and neglect, and then there's the 602 system for youth who hit probation, who are status offenders. Incorrigible youth who have just family conflicts are really underserved. They're, you know, simply because youth are truant or they're, you know, not observing curfew and that sort of thing. Sometimes these children come to our attention as 17-year-olds. Oftentimes, if the parent isn't able or willing to have that child return, we will intervene and the court will allow that children to enter foster care simply because of the parent-child conflict. And we are now with the, what is it called? The FFPSA, Families First Prevention and Services Act. Our prevention services are now hoping to wrap services around that group so that they don't have to come in, because parent-child conflicts are not for child abuse. You know, so it's hard to answer why does it exist or who is it for, because so often families that shouldn't be in our system are in our system.
Yeah.
So I just want to own that.
Okay, so in terms of the process of children entering this system, I thought we could start with Joshua. If you would like to shed light on any knowledge or experience you have around what it is like for kids first entering the system, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a wide range response, considering it really depends on the age of the child when they go into the system. It depends on the support, it depends on the worker, it really just depends on the resources that is offered to this particular individual. I can speak to my own personal experience of entering into the system. I was fortunate enough to actually have a worker that advocated for me, supported me, and helped me, give me a voice, which then birthed my voice for others. But it's a very lengthy process, and it's funny to hear, you know, hear the explanation of not getting along with the parents, because I had a very rocky relationship with my parents. Was part of the reason, one of the reasons why I was in the system. Other story a lot longer, but for another time, another story. But at the end of the day, it just, I found ups and downs. It took me, I think, I want to say 3 state workers before I actually got the one that was actually willing to help me. I was placed, and I've also helped support, encourage others that's been in and out of different foster homes due to neglect, abuse, or just being used for the fundings that they were getting in the household at particular time. So really, at first entering can be rough emotionally, mentally, all around. It's just, like I said, it really just depends on the case. It's a case by case basis.
Amazing, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, see, Nicole, would you like to jump in?
I'm happy to jump in. So one thing that might surprise folks is that there is a large number of babies 0 to 5 in the foster care system. And what we see in our community is that babies are born toxicologically positive, which is the fancy way to say with drugs in their system, where their parents were using substances while they were pregnant, and then they are born, and then there is a risk to a child, right? Because often youth who have been exposed to substances, they may have developmental delays, might be medically fragile, they're going through withdrawal or detox, right? And so having medical attention wrapped around those babies is really important. So most folks don't know that, for example, CASA, 33% of the youth that we serve are actually babies, 0 to 5. And so the goal is that we support the parents to be safe and sober parents, because recovery is a journey, but it is possible, right? And I don't think that anyone wakes up in the morning and says, I want to harm my child, but things happen, right? Addictions get in the way, mental illness, historical trauma, generational trauma. And so, yeah, I can mention that as a potential start to entering the system.
I could share a little bit, I guess, maybe kind of similar to Nicole, working with, we work with more probably, especially with littler kids when they're presenting the system, more with the parents. And I know I can share an example of, there's a lot of emotions, and we get assigned through the county office of ed, we get proactively assigned. So when a child enters the dependency system, we kind of just right away, hey, here's a kiddo, get assigned to a liaison. So that's really where we're doing a lot of like detective work. Okay, who are they still with a parent? Are they with a resource family? How do we get this parent to engage with us? They've got social workers talking to them, investigation social workers, ongoing social workers, counselors are coming in, attorneys are at play, the judge is hearing from them. So it's a lot of people. And why the heck would they want to talk to us? So just really understanding and like giving them that grace to understand this is a lot of different people. And you're probably 9 times out of 10 coming from a place of defense. Like your child's potentially not with you anymore, and that's really scary and hard too. And so how do we as providers create a space where it's like, hey, we get it, this is where you're at, how do we get out of this situation? And just trying to give space for them. So I guess that's more kind of the adults what that looks like. But I know, just kind of going back to working in a group home, that was very much so not the first entrance of care with those children. Those were usually kids who've been in and out of systems, but it's still just seeing those kiddos, and it's really scary. I know one of the things we used to do was make like a welcome basket, and it sounds so silly, but just having like, here's a hairbrush, here's a makeup wipe, whatever that looks like, and just knowing that these kids have been bounced around so much. And I think I just saw, I don't know if this is United Way, I'm looking at yours, sorry, but someone just put an article out recently about like getting luggage donated, knowing that these kids are schlepping their stuff around in garbage bags, and like, how can we make this not normalized, but just a little bit lighter, a little bit less of feeling like you're kind of being passed around from person to person. So I don't know if that really answered the question, but just to give some stories,
Yeah, I think that the goal here is just to sort of give voice to as much diverse experience and try to humanize. And
I think it's a really scary place to be for both kids and parents, I guess, is the long story short.
yeah, and if anybody has more to share about what the parents' involvement is in the foster care system, thanks for taking us there.
I would say that most of the folks that I've talked to that have been through the system describe it as like a tornado. You get swept up in it, there's so many things going on, like Olympia's mentioning, there's people coming in and out, there's social workers, there's judges, you gotta go to court, you gotta move from court to school, you have to talk to the strangest lady that you've never seen in your life that maybe dresses different than you and smells different than you and looks different than you. And everything changes really quickly, right? You're used to sleeping in a bed that Dawn is used as the the laundry detergent, and then you go to a bed where they use Tide. It really goes like so deep down where every core thing that you know is suddenly different if there is a removal, right? And so, and to balance that perspective, there's a lot of families who are technically in the foster care system, who are dependents of support, who are still with their families of origin, right? Who are getting services from the department with the goal of building their skills as parents to continue to be safe enough to parent so that the system is out of their lives. So some folks have a misconception that foster youth are only youth who are removed, which might be some youth, right? But there's also a large percentage of families that the youth and families always remain together, but that there's structures and support and supervision put in place so that the parents can develop more skills.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, we spoke to the challenges that, school-age children have, and just thinking about the newness and the, babies and that sort of thing. But I would just want to lift up fathers, because so often fathers are marginalized, in our system. And there's all the isms that come around, emotions and, what people feel like on the worst day of their lives when they're in court for the first time, when their children have been removed and they're hearing that they're not coming home. And what that must feel like to have your family broken and someone there who is also saying, I'm here to help you, but also I'm gonna make a plan for your child in case you can't get your child back. So you feel like they're kind of a double agent, right? But by law, that's what we're designed to do. There's a concurrent planning law that says if your child cannot be returned to you, we also have to be working on a permanent plan. you know, and it's hard sometimes for people to maintain that line, including helping professionals, because it looks like, well, the baby's doing great, dad still doesn't have this, dad doesn't have a support, you know, dad is working, but, you know, he has a challenging schedule, but the reality is, he's doing what he can, and he still has time. You know, so class should never be an issue why a child isn't returned. Because the example Nicole gave about positive talks in some communities, positive talk babies are not removed because that's not reason enough. You know, if they're in recovery, they're not removed. You know, and so it's just, you know, there's some things that are sort of regional, and there's just like the thing that just happened in Santa Clara, you know, with the baby who died by fentanyl. You know, there's knee-jerk reactions that the system does to avoid more liability, but also, just like with the crack epidemic, a lot of black and brown children can end up being in care and never go home for isolated incidents. And yes, death is very serious. And, you know what I mean, people still deserve their due process and to get every, you know, afforded every opportunity to get their families back together.
Great, so it sounds like reunification is a major priority.
Yeah.
And ideally not even removing the
Yeah.
child, just wrapping supports around the parents and the kids. Can you speak to what the process is like for reunification once a child is removed? What does that look like, and like what is the timeline?
So there's a court-ordered case plan that involves supportive services that include potentially assessments, you know, for alcohol and other drug use, may include a psychological assessment that kind of speaks to what the needs are for the particular parent, if they need, you know, support around adequate parenting, or if there's some underlying depression or anxiety, some condition that they really need support around, maybe some psychoeducation around, you know, how to navigate that condition. You know, there's a lot of people with, you know, mental health concerns, but, you know, with appropriate support, you can effectively, you know, manage and live your best life. But, you know, absent of that, you know what I mean, they can be overwhelming and kind of take over. And so there's a court-ordered case plan where both the minors council, you know, parents council, everybody sees this document, they kind of agree, you know, about you know, what should be offered, and the court sort of, the department makes recommendations, but the court orders it. And so then the support is provided by child welfare to walk that parent through that plan. Yeah, and to hope that in the end there'll be behavioral change, not just compliance, not just I went to parenting, I went to therapy, but behavioral change that will then show that the family is safe and stable enough to have that child return.
Can I share a story really quick? Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking this, I was in a child and family team meeting the other day, and that's something that Family and Children's Services holds to talk about all these things, like what are the barriers, what's going well, and the worker said one of the best things I've ever heard, and these children are out of home care, and she said, these you know, resource families are loving to hear your kids, they're here for you right now, but with all due respect, they do not want to raise your kids. And I just thought it was the coolest thing to hear, you know, to that mom to hear, like, they are here, they're holding space for your kid, but they don't want your kid, they want your kid to go back with you. And it just was like such a really raw but great way to say it. It just like made my whole day. So sorry, I just wanted to share that really quick on that note.
No, please, yeah. And Nicole, do you want to share anything about CASA's role in reunification?
Absolutely. So we are also 100% for reunification whenever safe and possible. As Gloria has mentioned a few times, there's a long history of child welfare removals based on racial bias, cultural biases. Right now, poverty is not a crime. Poverty is not a reason alone to remove a child. Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness alone is not a reason to remove a child. And so there has been a history of unbiased biased removals, right? And so at this point, to correct those mistakes, there has been legislation passed. There are certain standards. Legislation is being regularly updated. There's a tons of safeguards to protect both youth and also to give the department signals and protocols about how to handle that. On the CASA side, we train all of the volunteer advocates that work with us. We want to see families reunite. Even a parent who is not the best parent, but okay, an okay parent makes a better parent than the state, right? A decent parent makes a better parent than the state of California. And so whenever possible, like we know not just from longitudinal studies about the outcomes of youth who remain in the system for a long amount of time, that they have worse life outcomes overall, But we also know anecdotally from people who come back years later and say, I was in the system, I was never able to reunify. This is the ripple out impact for many, many years of my life. And this is what it's looked like. And so we are 100% for reunification, just as most partners are these days. And we train advocates to really see people as full human beings. None of us are the worst thing we've ever done. None of us are our biggest mistake, right? We believe people can grow and change if with the right investment and resources. So setting families up for success and having an advocate right along with them, cheering them on, supporting them, giving them rides to, whatever they need, meeting any resource gaps, that's all crucial as well as far as reunification.
And how many advocates do you work with at CASA?
So I would say in our volunteer reserves, we have maybe 300 advocates right now. Actively, we have about 130 advocates that are matched with youth right now, one-to-one. They get to know the youth as a person. Who are they outside of their trauma? What are their likes, interests, passions? What are their goals? What do they need in their lives? When's the last time they've been to the doctor? Right, so everything from basic needs to self-attainment, right? And yeah.
Okay, yeah, and you just mentioned getting to know individuals outside of their trauma.
Correct.
So the next question, and I'll just steer us back over to Joshua. Joshua, if you could speak to the sort of strength and resilience that you believe is sort of required in the experience of going through foster care, if you want to talk about your own or someone else that you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I became an advocate at a very young age, fortunately enough, and one of my actually close friends back then was I was in a group home with them, and he was very defeated at one point, and because he was taken from his family, he felt all alone. He felt that the system was against him. He felt his family was against him. He just felt like he had nowhere to turn around, and nowhere to turn, no one to speak to. He didn't trust a lot of people, and fortunately enough, I have the gift of gab as well as understanding and empathy because of my own experiences, and just to see though his resilience at that particular time to still want to fight and still go on, impressed me because I've also, I've also lost a lot of friends to, unfortunately, to suicide as well, given different, takes of life because of loneliness, depression, mental health, things of that nature. But this particular individual just wasn't ready to give up. And, besides just his resilience, his consistency, his fight, there was just something inside of him that just wanted to keep pressing forward. That honestly, between the both of us just continuously being in contact, working together, it kind of lit a fire in me to see a different point of view of a different perspective, and got me into the advocacy and the work that I currently, do holistically. It also branches out to the work that I've done in the HIV community as well. Seeing a lot of the homeless, kids on the streets as young as 10, sometimes 12, depending on their situation going forward. But overall, it's really hard to speak to strengths because again, I always say it's case by case. When your back's against the wall and you just feel like there's nowhere to go, or there's no one supporting you and there's just no way out, you're trying to hold on to some type of hope, some type of faith, some type of remembrance of the love or care or something of yourself, or something that actually loves you as well. I know it's probably dancing around the whole strength question, but it's really hard, because even if I think back to, my own experience, it was very dark times a lot of the time. So, strength wasn't even on my mind, let alone uttered out my mouth at that particular time. And I was a part of a lot of different agencies and organizations that would really try, but I just was always just shy, shut off into the corner because I just felt I wasn't going to be heard. I was, my opinions and my voice didn't matter. And I've met so many other people and children from different backgrounds, cultures that felt the same thing. But for me, what really pushed me forward in especially my DEI career is that majority of the people that felt that way looked very similar to me. They were, of course, Black and brown folk like myself, and from the Latino and African American community that felt they weren't heard, and just felt lost or by the wayside. And it just helped develop a lot more support groups in that area to help bring them back up to build up the strength.
Cool, so it sounds like that those support groups, those sort of finding others with similar experience was helpful to you? Is that what you were sort of saying?
Absolutely. Overall, finding someone that was able to relate to you was definitely a lifesaver. Because if you can talk to all the therapists in the world, you can talk to all these people in the world, but if they haven't lived the actual experience or gone through it, they can have an empathy, they can have an understanding, but at the end of the day, if they haven't actually lived it, it's really hard to really connect with that person. And I found, me and other individuals, they've always found one thing we had in common was we were unable to connect. But when we met with one another, we were able to connect because we had likenesses, we had relatability, we had similar experiences. Some was worse than others, some wasn't, it was just that factor of connection of just being, hey, that's what happened to you, I can relate to that, I know what that's like, that happened to me too, and it's just, and I think that support built and it grew, and then also be able to reestablish trust by able to see like-minded people. It just helped reestablish trust, reestablish trust in people, yourself, and overall it just helps bring back hope.
Thank you, Joshua. Olivia, would you like to share a little bit about, I guess maybe just the sort of themes of resilience and strength?
Sure. Well, I think just the cultural shift I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years, I would say. I mean, I feel like every meeting we have starts out with strengths. Every family team meeting we have, every education team meeting we have, IEPs, I just feel like that's always kind of across the board. We're gonna start off with the student strengths, and I feel like that's so huge. Just to even, I'll tell you, there's more often than not kids are in their hoodies and this meeting, but if a couple people start saying their strengths, you kind of see them sit up a little bit. They might not take their hoodie off, but they're sitting up a little bit more, and just to kind of continue to hear that, and even just the language we use. I know this is something that's come up a lot. We used to call this population, at risk, and we really moved to calling them at promise, and then kind of speaking to that resilience of at risk is such a negative connotation. Like at promise, like what are these kids gonna do given the right supports? And I just think that's such a huge, using that language and having the way that we all as a society and the culture look at these kiddos and not think like, oh, they're a challenge and they're hard and they're a drain on me, whatever, it's like, no, these are kids who can thrive and do amazing things. Look at what they've gone through already. Imagine what they could do if they have these supports put in place. So I think that's huge, and I see that all around, and that's really promising.
When did you see that shift? I'm curious.
The strengths-based stuff has been at least the last 5 years, I would say, and I'm not great with time, guys, especially after COVID, so don't quote me on that. But the language, I would say, in the last couple of years too. We really have changed from at risk to at promise, and that's across the board in all of the publications. You'll start seeing that if you haven't already. And I think that's huge. And yeah, just saying that message, like, could you imagine if someone called you at risk versus at promise? What that connotation sounds like to yourself?
Yeah, that label.
Yeah.
Really harmful, it sounds like.
Or even just use is fine too.
Yeah. I know, I'm like calling everyone youth now. Like, we work with extended foster kids,
yeah.
so like 21, I'm like, okay, that's not a youth
Yeah.
anymore. But
My dream is that youth that have been in the system are not marked forever and always by their experience in the system.
Yeah.
That is really just one page or one chapter in a young person's life, not their whole life story, right? Because, think about your own lives, right? What is like the most traumatic experience you've ever been through? And then imagine like having that brought up again in every single meeting that you have to sit through with your teachers and the social workers and your auntie and your resource parent and everyone that you know. And they're all talking about all of your worst, most traumatic things. And they're laying it all out there, your most personal information for everyone to know. And the history has been that it wasn't talked about strengths, right? So that's why it's so important to bring up things like strengths, right? To take a strengths-based approach and to recognize that humans are multifaceted. I feel that a trauma-informed approach includes looking at a person beyond their trauma, like I mentioned earlier. Who is this person outside of their most traumatic experiences? What kind of ice cream do they like, and what are their passions and dreams and hobbies? because that also grounds people in dreaming, like seeing a future for themselves, seeing a pathway that does not involve the system, seeing opportunities.
And one thing I'd just like to add is just the struggle with the word resilience alone, you know, and how far some people in the system really distance themselves from that word, because it's almost like, you know, kids are resilient, they'll get over it, they'll get beyond it. But the reality is nobody volunteers, you know, right? These are involuntary families in our system. They don't want to be in our system, and so it's almost minimizing of their experience to say they're resilient, they'll be fine, you know what I mean? Or, well, we gave them support, you know, it'll be okay, you know, they'll forget that and they'll move on. And so many, two very close friends of mine are ex-foster youth, and one of the things they say is once a foster youth, always a foster youth, because there are things that ripple in them from their experience as a child. With their permission, one of them was the product of a sex worker, and her father, the pimp, dropped her off at a local neighbor's house where she was raised. And seeing her father and her mother in the community, knowing that they were her parents, but not being raised with them, knowing that she had 15 other siblings, you know what I mean? The experience she's had with this older woman as her parent now, you know what I mean? And coming to school and everything else, and this woman ultimately adopted her once she got to be an adult, you know, because she became her forever family, but she was labeled in the community, you know, and now she's a professional, she's, you know, been to graduate school, she's a licensed therapist, she's done amazing things, but one thing she won't be called is resilient, you know what I mean, because it really changed who she was, that experience, you know, and she wanted to work in the system on behalf of others so that they didn't have the same experience. And so I am very careful about that term, you know, because again, I don't want to minimize someone's experience or treat it as, you know, comparatively, you know, with somebody else who had a worse experience. So I just try to be really careful, you know, when it comes to that word.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I'm just sort of, yeah. Joshua, did you want to respond?
No, I was just agreeing. That's very powerful to hear and very eye-opening and part of a new perspective of that word.
Yeah, and I was just, what you were saying, Joshua, was also resonating with what Gloria was saying about finding familiarity with folks who have been through something similar, and needing to be recognized and seen for what you've been through, and not just, oh, you're resilient.
It's very great to hear about like other areas in the housing world. We also use strengths-based models, so I'm glad that that's making its way into other places and into our lives too in the housing world. And I think what Joshua was sharing around being with people who have similar experiences to you is so powerful. And so when we think about designing programs and staffing programs, I feel like thinking about peer support roles and what does it look like to have somebody who's been through that process and can speak to that process, speak to that lived experience is so important. And then Joshua, I feel like you also mentioned, like historically, I don't think that lived experience voice has been at the table of designing programs, of figuring out what are those solutions. And so what are the ways that we can make space for those voices and listen to those voices, especially knowing that historically they haven't been listened to. And so when you start to listen and somebody starts to feel like they're being listened to and they see their perspective being added to the way that these programs are working, it's amazing to see that happen. And I think that we need to do more of that kind of work within all of our systems. And within our housing system, we're actually recruiting people with lived expertise to join some boards that will be a part of that change, which I'm very excited about. So
That's great, yeah. Okay, would you like to get us started with the next question? So for foster youth who have transitioned out of the system and it's been relatively smooth, there's a sense of stability as they enter into adulthood. What are the most beneficial resources that they've received? Yeah, if you could just talk
Yeah,
about
it's a
that.
great great question. Well, that can look a couple of different ways. So maybe I can speak to the different ways it looks like. So I've worked with extended foster care a couple of times. So basically, this is a law. I'm not going to tell you the right year, but it was at least 10 years ago, I want to say. The extended foster care from 18 to 21. So kiddos could opt in. So they have to be doing things. They have to be going to school. They have to be getting a job, or removing barriers that are hindering them from doing such a thing. And so they're still meeting with a worker, and so there's still some oversight. But for all they're 18 to 21, so they're adults. But having that support, and we really saw that looking at data, and we can talk about this with like the intersectionality of homelessness in foster youth as well, is like they just weren't prepared to go out there. It just wasn't. I mean, I wouldn't have been prepared to go out there at 18. I don't think anybody would have been. So kind of what does that stability look like? And so that does have a worker they're meeting with. There's some housing supports that look at a couple different ways. Encompass Community Resources, they have a housing program where they'll do vouchers. And I don't know too much about vouchers, so I'll be free to jump in more about this, but I think it's going to lead into you. Where they can give vouchers to youth to live in apartments. The program I used to work for has an actual house where they have 4 or 5 bedrooms, I think, and there's staff that's kind of in and out. They're not really on site, but they can come in and they meet weekly with them. So they have like case managers that they work with. They usually get like food gift cards. So it's a lot of that like hand holding of this is how we budget, and this is how you pay your cell phone bill, and this is how you pay your rent, even though you're not really paying your rent, So there's kind of that transition services, the idea of like slowly but surely taking those supports away, and for the idea of them to eventually kind of leave the nest and go out to society. So that's one way. So the other way is, some kiddos do opt out at 18. Luckily, they are able to opt back in. So we see that a lot. I think when kids say, oh no, I'm done with you guys. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm out of here. And then a couple months later might say, actually, I'm not quite ready to do that. And so they can go back to the court and say, I really wasn't ready. Please let me come back.
And that's 18 and 21.
18 and 21. So those are 2 ways. So then after 21, again, Encompass, and I'll defer to Alex for some of this other information. They do also have another program that I'm not as familiar with, but it's an extension of that, and they're not involved with the courts anymore, but they do have some housing programs. There's not a lot, and that's the problem. There's huge wait lists, and again, I'm sure you could talk more to this, Alex, but I know when I'm working with a non-minor, usually when they turn 20, we're putting them on that list to kind of exit 21 to try and get some support at 21. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I think it's vouchers. I don't know if there's as many supports there, and I wish I had more information to share with you all, but it's a really cool program. I wish there was more to offer, and I think that's kind of tangible stuff. Additionally, we work really closely with Guardian Scholars at Carrillo College for our youth who go to college. That's a foster care support group on campus, and they have a ton of awesome resources. They have a physical space where you can go and like the tutoring will come to you. They have snacks, it's always important to kids. They have counselors who will come meet them there. Again, kind of that one-stop shop with the idea of like, this is really scary. How can we hold this space for you so that eventually you can go figure it out on your own? And again, just to kind of speak to what Joshua and I think Alex was saying, is it's a group of people with lived experiences. How can we support each other in this group? So those tangible things like book vouchers are huge. Bus passes. I know that the Children's Services provides bus passes. So yeah, those really tangible things are huge. And then of course, obviously like mental health supports as well, get them connected with like children's behavioral health. Sorry, that was a lot of information. I don't know if I answered the question. Sorry guys, I can talk a lot, excuse me.
I think Alex.
Yes, we want to jump into my spot here, thank you.
So I'll touch upon the
Okay.
identification program vouchers, which I think is what you're referencing
Yes.
to. But I guess at a further like outward look is there are several programs within our community that serve specifically transitional age youth, regardless if they have foster care experiences or not. And those programs range from like outreach services, housing problem solving and diversion services, rapid rehousing services where they provide subsidies to folks so that they can pay their rent and then slowly kind of wean off along with case management services. And then also transitional housing programs that offer more time limited opportunities to live in a place until they can transition out of that area.
What is the transitional housing like unit capacity in our community?
Yeah, so right now there's one program that we think of as transitional housing, and that's our host homes program through the Bill Wilson Center. And so they actually recruit host homes where it's a person who maybe has an open room in their household that they want to have this young person come and live there with them. And usually it's for a short period of time, like 6 months up to a year, I believe, and then they can transition out of it. That's the only one that I know of that's live right now, but I believe we're working towards developing other transitional housing programs specifically
So in Compass, they have a couple of different programs. They have a transitional housing program, and it's so, I don't want to use the word interesting, but it's complicated because every housing program operates slightly differently and has slightly different resources, and so it's hard to say like, oh, this one program is apples to apples to this other program. So without getting too far into the weeds, their transitional housing program can offer services where they're providing like that rental assistance, the grocery gift cards, all those things that Olivia was just telling us about. And then they reached, I believe it's 23, and they no longer qualify for that program. But what they do still qualify for is this program called Family Unification Program vouchers. And that's what I was talking about earlier in our talk today around where the tenant pays 30% of their adjusted income and the housing authority pays the rest of their rent. So if a youth is making no income right now because maybe they're going back to school or they just can't find a job right now, they would be paying $0 to their rent. So that's a huge support that they're receiving. Alongside that voucher opportunity, they also have case management staff. And so those folks are providing supportive services to the youth and really tailoring it around what does that youth need, what are the goals that they want to work towards, and how can they best support them in those goals. And those supportive services are supposed to be offered for at least 36 months. And like Olivia was saying too, like there is kind of that take and pull of, you know, what type of supportive services do you want right now? What can we help you with? And also how can we kind of pull back and let you fly and be off in this world too.
What is the eligibility criteria for those vouchers?
Yeah, so there's two groups who are eligible for the vouchers. Thank you for this question, because when we were talking about reunification, this also was coming to my mind. So youth who are between the ages of 18 to 25 years old and who have foster care involvement, it can either be current foster care involvement, like our non-minor dependents, or it could be folks who have left the system and now are needing some support. So as long as they're below the age of 25, when they obtain the voucher and move into their housing unit, they qualify. The vouchers are time limited to 3 years with an opportunity to extend the voucher for an additional 2 years. And with our partnership with the Housing Authority of Santa Cruz County, they have been actually taking folks who are in that position to wean off of the voucher and are extending them and graduating them essentially to housing choice vouchers. So that voucher becomes a long-term, lifelong voucher that they can have access to, which is, it's the golden ticket, right? It's amazing for long-term stability. And then when we were talking about family reunification, these vouchers can also be used for families who have an open child welfare case. And even though housing and homelessness isn't a reason to remove a child, when you have that stability in your life of having a roof over your head, knowing where you're gonna sleep that night, you're able to work on all the other things that go into helping you reunify with your child. And so that's another kind of preventative way that we can stop people from becoming more involved with the foster care system. And those vouchers are also lifelong vouchers.
I'm gonna add a bit of a different flavor to this conversation, which is like foster youth need what all youth need to be successful, which is long-term investment from an adult who cares about them, who is for free and forever, right? Investment from a caring adult that is not time limited, that is not time bound, that is not gonna be extended in 6 months or not extended in 6 months, a big mystery. And like you've heard, so many of these programs have time limits, eligibility criteria, like fit in this little tiny box. And foster youth deserve so much more than that, right? They deserve folks that are gonna show up for them, folks that are gonna help them write their college applications, folks are gonna help them cook quick and easy meals that are economical, folks that are gonna show up for them when they are having really shitty days, folks that are gonna be present for them in all the positives and negatives of one's life. And I think that that's something that all youth deserve and that foster youth especially don't always have access to, right? So while there are so many wonderful supportive programs, what folks need to exit successfully is adults that believe in them, that care for them, that claim them as like you are kin, and can be there for free and forever. That's what folks really need. Yeah.
can share just a quick story. I have a non-minor who I've been working with since she was a freshman in high school, and she's on her second year of career now, and she just moved into her own apartment with one of these programs, and I got to drop off like a little, basket to her the other day, and it was just the coolest thing. She's like, come see my apartment, it was like her first apartment, and she's living with her boyfriend, we'll conversation about that, but it was just so cool, and it's like this teeny tiny little apartment, but she had it all decorated, she had plants, she showed me all her like organization of her kitchen cupboards. I mean, it was just like, what a cool moment to be able to see, and this was a really, really best case scenario kid to begin with. She had that kind of long-term connection. She was living with a family friend. They're never gonna drop her. She had a really great setup to begin with. But even with that, she still wanted her own apartment. She still wanted to get out on her own, and it was just really, really sweet to kind of see that come full circle and just like the pride beating from her face. So sorry, so to share that with you all.
Yeah, thank you. Laura, do you want to speak to?
Well, I think, just to echo Nicole's, I tell people, my staff included, is that programs don't equal people. Like, there are some critical programs that you need as a transition into adulthood. And there are times when they get disconnected from those programs, and that's the time they find themselves unhoused. And so it's easy, if you have a person to connect to, you have somebody to reach out to help you over that hurdle. But there's times when just like Santa Cruz is a very attractive coastal town, and people want to come to the beach and all that. But 18 to 21 and even up to 25 is a very portable time in your life. You move, you change regions, you want to, my children went to the East Coast, they want to live in big cities or go to Southern California. Where out there do you find resources? You know what I mean? And so I think part of the issue, and I don't want to get off the question, but part of the problem is that because of the portability of your life, it's hard to reconnect with those same programs once you get disconnected. So to echo, what Nicole said, is that we do need more people to stand for our foster youth. Programs don't equal people. We need better communication with our programs so all our youth have access to them. I think that's one of the big issues here, is that so much support, but we're not getting all of our youth funneled in. You know what I mean? And to make sure they can benefit from it. The referral pathways need work. So yeah, again, programs don't equal people. So we need people to stand for our foster youth. Yeah.
Did you want to share something about stability through the transition to adulthood? What sort of, in your mind, what is the most helpful sort of resource? How can the community help?
To hear what I've heard so far, I was there thinking to myself, I was like, literally, I was in foster care in the wrong state, in the wrong place. Because, I think half of what was mentioned was not even offered back when it makes me feel a little upset back when I was young. But just to hear all that is being offered, it warms my heart because there's that much support going on, in this particular area. I was new to Santa Cruz, so I absolutely love it, but I got familiar with the nonprofits and organizations just by doing my own research, because unfortunately at a young age I had to learn to fend for myself, and research was one of my top things to do. And advocate, have a voice was one of my biggest things to do. And like people said, having somebody in your corner is always helpful. And whether it's a biological, a family member, whether it's a friend, whether it's a worker, whether it's a teacher, a guidance counselor, having an adult just to reassure you and push you and support you and encourage you is the best thing you could possibly have. I could probably count on my hand growing up, like how many people I actually had that was authentically, for me and rooting me on and things of that nature. And then, when I came across some other people, they didn't know what therapy was. They didn't know what support was. They didn't know what it was like to have a positive relationship with another person because of things that they've been through. They also go through the system, coming off the streets or something like that at a young age. They also don't know what housing's like. They didn't know what it was basically like sleeping in a warm bed, having a hot meal, so a lot of it, Salvation Army was like a big thing up in New York for me and for others and things of that nature. There's other organizations and support, but listen to this panel of what's being offered nowadays. It's definitely a huge blessing, especially now since from what I've heard and also ran into is it seems the youth when they age out, they're either they're trying to find something to really what's the word I'm looking for? Like substitute their feelings, whether that be, drugs, whether it be alcohol, whether it be other things, they're falling along the lines of other things to have that additional support, just to be able to stem away from that, take a detour to say, hey, let's go to school, let's go here, let's go there, so yeah, I can't really speak to because I didn't have a lot of resources. I really had to, me and the group that I actually was connected to, we really had to do a lot of fending ourselves. A lot of us, we did end up homeless. A lot of us, had to figure out where the next couch we had to find and things of that nature. Where's the next meal was gonna come from? When's the next dollar, the money, the clothes, things of that nature. And, it was just always a fight. But I'm definitely grateful to hear that this new age support has, especially in Santa Cruz, because Santa Cruz is a great place. So that's why I said it makes it sound like I should have been out here for my foster care experience, but who knows what it was like 10 plus years ago. So this may have been all new age for now. So it's definitely incredible. But I definitely hope, moving forward, it gets not just West Coast, but just, countryside of that, all youth in foster care gets the same type of support, same type of services. As that elderly, my always concern is when people age out and they're not prepared mentally, emotionally, or physically sometimes, what do you do? Where do they go? How do they know who to reach back out to? How do they get back into the system? How do they get connected to be able to, get the help that is needed without harming themselves or doing something that will cause harm, or putting themselves in danger. So.
Great. And so in terms of outreach, how do young people get connected with services?
So one thing I want to mention, and it kind of speaks to Joshua's point, is that as Nicole mentioned, there's legislation now that means there were changes in child welfare to help with this issue. So there's a section, it's called 391, and there's compliance that we have to do as youth are transitioning out of the system to make sure they have a transitional independent living plan that involves a housing plan, their documents that they need, their birth certificate, social security card. A part of that is knowing how to connect with independent living program services so that if they need support, and that includes having a ward or court letter, so that when you transition out, if you later decide you want to go to college, you can show the letter so that you have verification of your time in care so that you qualify for free education, which includes housing, and so by law, we have to provide certain documents and supports as youth are transitioning out. But as I mentioned, the portability is the issue. So if you came from, say, Boulder, or something, and then you find yourself up in Reading, where is that county services? You know what I mean? Where do you connect in that county? Where the county you came from, where their support services are. And certain counties have different centers for that, just like the independent living program, like it would be, the Thrive Hive, I guess, locally for Encompass, where they could kind of touch in to get access to other services. And I think the biggest issue for me is making sure there's information everywhere that you frequent, everywhere that young adults frequent, so that if a person just drops in, you know what I mean, including not just colleges, but like even donut shops, like the Farrell's that's on Ocean. You know what I mean? If people just drop in, is there a place where you can post up something so that if you're in need of help, you can reconnect? Because so often youth don't, everybody doesn't have the research that Joshua has to go find it themselves. You know what I mean? So it's easy then to be left to your own devices. You know what I mean? And then if you move and you lose all your documents, literally in my old jurisdiction, we had youth calling up at 25, hey, I need a birth certificate. And you think, well, you're 25 now. But again, it's like you fill out the form, you get the birth certificate, you leave it at, we'll call, have them come pick it up. Because for whatever reason, they don't know where to go get it at. You know what I mean? But they're a former foster, you can help them. And if you can verify that time in the system, we can extend those courtesies. So I just think it's really important for us to consider, public service announcements, whatever we need to do so that youth know how to get connected. If we really think about all the young people that are on the street, they need to be connected, and they need people who want to stand for them. So yeah, not just programs. Yeah,
I think independent living program is huge. I mean, and just to give that another shout out, that's through Encompass here locally, and as Gloria said, every county is different, so it's not across the board, unfortunately, but I know here, and we have the Thrive Hive she referenced, which is over kind of by Harvey West, and it's a drop-in center, but they actually will serve former foster youth after they, not emancipate, that's not the the right word, but after they age out of the system. So I think it's after 25 they can still access those services. So that's a really great kind of transition person where they can help exactly like how do I get a birth certificate? How do I get a social security card? How do I apply for a job? How do I do a resume? You know, all that stuff. And then yeah, social workers. I mean, they're really the ones who are doing that connecting. And that's part of what that child and family team meeting I keep referencing is about. Is like what are the needs that this youth has and who's going to do it and who's going to oversee that. So I think that's where a lot of connections come in, kind of before they age out, and then after. I always really lean on the ILP program.
I think it's so important to be out in the community where people are, to step out from behind the desk and in your office space and meet people where they actually go, at the ferals, at the library, wherever it is that they are. And so we actually have a team of connectors throughout our community that go and provide outreach and meet people. They're connected to the schools, to our hospitals, to all these places that people oftentimes frequent, and try to connect with people in those ways so that it's not just youth coming to us, but us coming to youth to people.
Okay, so I mean, we've heard so many incredible resources and programs, and we started the conversation off. Caitlin was sharing some really startling and heartbreaking statistics about what's happening in our community around housing, homelessness, and specifically foster youth, formerly foster youth. In your opinion, each of you, why do former foster youth make up such a high percentage of people experiencing homelessness in our community? And Nicole, would you like to get us started?
I would love to get us started.
Yeah.
I think that although family reunification is the goal, that's not always the outcome. Because there are moments, there are situations in which parents have harmed their children to the point where they will never be on good terms again. Or so much damage has been done where they're not able to have a healthy relationship, and usually people set boundaries and draw borders, or the parents no longer living. Maybe they've passed of their addiction or other circumstances. So I think what I always say is that a safety net should be a fundamental human right. A safety net. And I think that foster youth are no different than any other youth in many regards, except that sometimes they don't have that safety net. If they don't get their paycheck on time, if their boss is sexually harassing them and they have to quit last minute, if they get a flat tire on the freeway, right? Folks are so close to the edge. There is such a small margin between things going fine and absolute disaster. Folks don't have a safety net. And so I think that's one of the factors that goes into why is it that so many folks are homeless? Because they don't have a person to call and say, can I sleep on your couch? Can I borrow an extra $200, right? So I always say, I think a safety net is a fundamental right for all youth. Yeah.
I think about how expensive it is to live here. I think I Googled it, so check my data sources, but the average one-bedroom unit right now is $2,775 in Santa Cruz County, which is, if you do the math, and you know, maybe my math doesn't math, but I'm pretty sure that equals, if you have to make 3 times the rent to live in that unit, you need to have a combined household income of $52 per hour. And that is a lot of money, especially when we're talking about young adults who are just entering the workforce and are going into entry-level positions, which I don't know if you all have looked on Indeed, but I feel like it's usually maybe $20, maybe $25 if you're really lucky. And so even if you've got 2 people in that household in that 1-bedroom unit, you're still not making it up to that $52 an hour. And then when you have all of these barriers in a competitive housing market, it makes it really difficult to be competitive with all the other applications that a landlord is receiving, especially if you don't have somebody to co-sign for you, or to give that kind of guaranteed rent to help you with that security deposit. And so I think the supportive relationships aspect also plays a big role in that housing and homelessness situation too.
I think I would just add that in thinking about some of the struggles that our youth face when they don't have consistent parents, you know, if you think about every couple of years, your parent changing, you know, and so there are key things that you learn at certain stages. And when you don't have that consistent parent kind of pouring into you those lessons, you don't really learn about the reciprocity of adult relationships. So even though you have a plan when you transition out, as soon as some rift happens, you know, there's no forgiveness, there's no grace, you just get kicked out. You know, and then it's like you're left to your own devices to kind of create another option for yourself. And then if you're disconnected from people, because again, you know, the people aren't investing in each other, right? There's, you know, they have these transactional relationships, you're kind of left with, you know, I mean, and I think about our youth who are trafficked and who experience exploitation and trying to get their needs met, you know? And so it kind of comes back to what Nicole said about the safety net. And some of the things we're doing now, we sit on a committee together to develop legal and relational permanence for our youth in care and identify the people who make up their support network. You know, help to create, you know, if we find a long lost relative, you know, establish phone calls, start writing letters, consider having a visit for holidays to help build support networks so that when youth are transitioning out, it's not just absent of family, there's a support network wrapped around them, and it's not just all system involved people. So I think that's a piece of it. And there are times when that young adulthood, I remember constantly telling my kids, the 20s for me was a broke period. You know, I graduated college and was making $8 an hour at a group home with a bachelor's in psychology. There's no way I could have afforded my own place. So I lived with my mom until I could, you know, decide what else I was gonna do. But, you know, $8 an hour and you got a bachelor's degree? You know what I mean? But thinking about our youth, they're facing the same kind of thing as Alex mentioned about the low wages that they're making. How can you go out there and apply for your own place and, you know, save all your rent and, I mean, your deposits and everything else? So that support network is invaluable.
Yeah, and then one missed paycheck, somebody gets sick.
Right. Yeah.
I think just to go back to the trauma abuse, you know, the unresolved trauma. It's like, yeah, how do you get out of bed and go to work in the morning when you're dealing with all of these things, especially if you're a youth who came into the system at 17 and you're all, you know, I mean, that's a lot to carry. I think that's really huge too, and just knowing that does not go away overnight. And we're really lucky, again, in our county where we have a really great system with children's behavioral health and they get connected right away, but that's a long process that is not overnight cure, you know? I mean, I think we're also working on our trauma, right, on some level or another, and so think about that with our youth.
Joshua, do you wanna weigh in?
Absolutely. From someone that actually just left Santa Cruz because of the cost of living, since the only reason why I'm not there now, I could definitely be in person, but I can't imagine a youth trying to live there on their own. As someone that also just recently was searching for jobs in the area, seeing the wages in that area for an adult itself, actually really surprised me that it was so low, given the cost of living in that area. But honestly, I think, you know, just to also add in is that I think a lot of the problem, you know, when you aren't able to connect a foster child back or adult, teenager, whatever it may be, back with their family, besides loneliness, depression, you know, mental health plays a big part of that. When you try to find that side area just to substitute to get rid of these type of feelings, some of these people, you know, some people may not want to go the route, you know, and you know, I was looking at some numbers as well, so to hear the numbers when you started the meeting about the statistics being so high, it kind of didn't shock me, but there's a lot of other factors that play into that part of not reconnecting, such as whether it's drug and alcohol, whether it's religion, whether it's culture, whether, you know, you're gay, whether you're a lesbian, whatever that case may be, being part of a certain community plays a part of that because maybe they don't want you back, or maybe you're bouncing around because of beliefs and things of that nature, and maybe the person or the child just finally gave up and was just like, well, maybe the street's a safer place. Maybe under the bridge is more safer because I don't have nobody judging me. I don't fear for my life. I'm able to just do what I want at this particular time and be who I am openly. And you know, part of I can definitely speak to, you know, the LGBT community as well, is because a lot of the people that I used to work with on New York streets, they were homeless because they were kicked out. They were kicked out of their foster homes, they were kicked out of group homes. They had to do a lot of sex work. They had to do a lot of different things just to survive at a very young age. And when I used to listen to their stories, it used to break my heart to actually hear why they're out there and to ask questions such as, well, have you tried this resource? Have you followed up with your worker? And workers are just MIA, or they're just tired, or they're exhausted, or they don't know who to reach out to, it's just extremely sad, the factor of, trying to survive, especially in an expensive area. So it just goes back to having all these particular resources that we have here that was mentioned on this panel. But I think I mentioned this, I'm not sure if I mentioned this when I was in the training over at Housing Matters or not, but I think one thing that I will definitely say that with all of the areas that Santa Cruz is definitely missing is a one-stop shop. It's great that you have all these different organizations and these different support systems and these different programs, but you have to jump around and go to each individual, because once you get here, you have to go here, or you have to go to another building. And instead of being able to walk into a building, everything you possibly need in that one building, it makes it a little more tiresome to have to keep jumping around to different places and different people and different organizations to get what you need. And that also could probably, instill like a lack of hope or faith in the system and the programs, because it's like, well, if I have to keep jumping around, how do I get the energy to proceed? How do I get the stability to keep going? How do I get the consistency I need to survive? That's just my take on that.
I want to build on something that Joshua is saying and talk about the intersection between foster youth, homelessness, and vulnerabilities that create situations where trafficking can occur. So just so you get super clear that no minor should be selling sex or exchanging sex for anything. That's called commercial sexual exploitation, right? And it's child trafficking. And so just to get mega clear that the system creates vulnerabilities in youth, right? Creates situations when folks might be unhoused, they might be approached by older folks who are more savvy and who are traffickers who can take advantage of a young person who's in a really dire situation, right? And so just want to get super clear that sexual exploitation exists in our community and is never okay. Minors should never be in a situation where they have to exchange sex for anything, including housing, including a $1 cheeseburger, including $1,000, doesn't matter. It's against the law, and yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're about to transition to the audience Q&A, but before we do, please, can you call to action for the people here? How can we support? You've mentioned in terms of the intersection of homelessness and foster care, and for trauma, mental health, social safety net, long-term committed adults in lives, lack of affordable housing, low income wages, all of that sort of in this brings us to this situation, this conversation. So how can the people here help?
I would say, and I unfortunately left my flyers at the office. I had prepared them to come here, but considering being a resource parent for a foster youth or even a non-minor dependent in the 18 to 21-year-old, yeah, we need more people, and again, it's not, sometimes I think people feel that they don't have the bandwidth or they're worried about safety and that sort of thing, but, just consider, coming to an informational meeting to hear about it. I was thinking about what Alex was saying about the host model, but I think you can, if you were to go through the process to get your home approved, you can have some meetings to engage with the youth to your own comfort level. You know what I mean? Just to see if it's something that you can consider.
And what's the first step? Where would somebody go to get more
That would
information?
be, and I can leave my number, but I'm thinking about the RFA program. Can you, yeah, and then we can probably leave it before I leave here and we can get the number. But yeah, we'll be calling in and then, yeah, attending an informational. There's classes and supports and background checks and that sort of thing. But, if people are interested, that would be a huge help.
Thank you.
My pitch is to become an advocate. It's an easy application process. It's a 30-hour training where we get really in-depth in the child welfare system and the probation system. You get to fill out case preferences about who is it that you wish to work with, what skills can you provide to a young person, and then we find a match, right? And then you're off and running with a young person that can lean on you and support you and confide in you and just show up, right? Because you just need folks that are gonna show up. And so, we have a training starting on January 20th. So if folks are interested in becoming an advocate, I'm here to answer any questions after this. Yeah.
Just keep looking at Joshua's screen here saying resolving homelessness together. And I think that that's so true. It really takes a community of people to come together to make homelessness no longer exist here. And so I think for me, what comes to my mind is, I bet you know a landlord in this, in this small town of ours. Do they have a unit open that they could rent to one of the people that we're talking about tonight? I think we had something else in it, evaporated from my mind. It'll come back, but yeah. But I think just looking within your own network of people and having conversations like this with them, and they're like, oh, I'm not so sure. I don't know if I want to rent to that person, and engaging in those conversations, not just being like, okay, that's it. I think can go a really long way too.
Yeah, I mean, just piggybacking off of everything you guys said, I've host families. I went to an information session with host families years ago, and I thought it was such a cool program. So, and again, everyone's capacity is different. So, I mean, I know I certainly can't have, I have roommates as well, so I can't actually have someone in my apartment. But I think whatever you can do, and even if that's just having an open mind and having an open heart and being open to conversations with people, and understanding that there's so many different variables and so many different things that happen, and it's not necessarily, no one's a bad person, no one's a good person, it just is what it is, and we are where we are. And so just creating space to dig a little deeper with people. And it's the holidays, make donations.
Joshua.
Yeah, first I'd like to say thanks for giving more information about CASA, because I actually just applied myself out here in Concord. Something I've been very interested in doing just to give back. And then secondly, I just also want to acknowledge the fact that, understandably times are different right now. When people sit there and they say, what can we do for the community? People always go towards money first. Money is always great, don't get me wrong. It definitely will help push the buck. But I think, what's even better is, one thing I like what I've been hearing and saying is people, we need people. Programs are great, but people are even better. And if you have a skill set, you may have a skill set that you can share with an individual, and you may be able to show up to an organization, do a presentation on your skill set. You may be able to train or teach the skill set to someone. So use your skill set to any of these organizations that are up here. Reach out. So it's only on the website. You can fill out a volunteer form. Definitely volunteer and just show up. A physical presence is, in my personal opinion, is a lot better than money, because you're making a difference, and it counts for that individual you're making a difference for, and you never know what it will do for you. You may end up with a long-lasting relationship and a new friend down the road that may be able to save your life and do something for you down the road, so definitely say skill set is required. Donating your time is always good, just showing up is always good, and just being available.
One thing I wanted to mention, just piggybacking off what Joshua said, if you're involved in an organization that could benefit from just having a 30-minute presentation about being a resource parent, be it your faith community or club that we can maybe come to and just share information, because maybe you're not interested, but maybe somebody is, please do reach out.
Amazing. Yep. Yeah, just sharing, I think, some of the information that you all have shared, bring it back to your communities, would be great. Okay, before we open it up, just thank you all so much. This is amazing.
Okay, so before we open this up to questions, just going to remind you of the community agreements. So we're going to focus on that, and if you don't, I'm going to cut you off. So you've got a lot of information. I'm going to open it up now to questions. We'll go one at a time.
If someone is going to be a foster parent, what kind of supports are offered to them? I know it was touched on a little bit, but just more specifically.
Yeah, there's training that they are provided before the licensing process, and there's also ongoing mentoring and support they receive, monthly visits, therapy services if they need to in terms of dealing with the youth if they have special needs, or even just the adjustment of a new person into their home. So there's ongoing supports that they receive, including financial supports, of course.
I actually have two questions. the people that join the foster system to be foster parents, is it just a small minority that just do it for the money? Most of them are really dedicated to what they're doing, so there isn't, we hear the horror stories.
I know, yeah.
But that's not your norm.
I would hope it's not. It's very hard sometimes to really tease that out.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Because
can
you often
tell
hear
that
the
they're
stuff
gonna
years
be-
later. Years later, you hear about things that have happened. But in the moment, you know, when the
Yeah.
worker is going into the home, there's time where the worker literally talks to the child away from the foster parent. You know, that we're, you know, because
Yeah.
you need to know what's really happening. And then there's definitely assessments that are happening every time they're in the home. So I would hope that it is a small fragment, but it's often, sometimes people think about it if they're getting $1,000 a month, that is to support the child in the home. And there are some foster parents who look at it as, that's your rent, it's not to go to you, it's for you staying in my home. Like, that's my pay for taking care of you. And so we try to really flip that so that they're not in need of a financial need to keep their household running, but that it's an incentive, you know what I mean? So that a portion of it goes to the child, you know, for the child's care.
And then
Yeah.
you're probably burdened with the fact too that you're so desperate to have people do that,
Yeah.
that you maybe pull the rules back a little bit, and it becomes a rent thing rather than, that they're caring for the kids.
So with older youth, there is a, if they're in what's called a supervised independent living placement,
Mhm.
there is a portion that literally can be carved out simply for rent, and then the other portion goes to the youth.
Right.
You know, and the system I came from, we would literally separate it, like the foster parent would get 400 and the 600 would go to the youth. So, so yeah, I mean, we know it happens, and
Right.
yeah, we try to guard against it.
All of these issues you brought tonight, it's a close line between enabling and
Yeah.
solving the problem.
Right.
I believe you two ladies, I think really hit the nail on the head. You've gotta have people, programs are important, but I can see what, a little bit of experience I've had in my life as a manager when I was working, and hiring sweeper kids for the shop that I managed, something like that. Anyway, the safety net thing, I mean, I never found that answer, that, because these people, like you say, are so close to the edge, one thing goes off, I don't realize how fortunate I am, having so many levels to fall to if I had a problem. Do you have a short explanation of what you think that safety net should look like that you believe would work?
Yeah. What heals trauma is like consistent, caring, positive relationships, right?
Right.
So if there's someone, if your kid has a friend who you know has been through something hard, bring them in close, you know, invite them over for the holidays. Think of them when you write the birthday cards every year, right? Yeah, to just like extend the idea of family into people that you just care really deeply for, that can come and rely upon you. So I think we all know those folks that, we get the sense could really use the extra love. I would say that's a good way. And then also teaching sustainability and independence, right? Teaching meal prep, teaching budgeting, teaching how to get your driver's license.
Children that you have
We're
in
gonna,
care.
sorry, just a reminder, we're gonna take space, make space, so let's let Nicole finish. Thanks.
But yeah, but I hear you. Like it's about sustainability, right? So teaching skills for the long haul. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
I think there was one that came up.
On the screen, yeah, I was trying to read it, but it was too quick. I'll check it, I'll make sure it gets voiced.
I
Dr.
have a
Wagner?
planet question for Al. There was mention about wait lists for some of these housing resources. What's the situation with the PUP program and waiting list, and what are the challenges with getting those housing supports?
Yeah, so, HUD regulations state that we have to offer the 36 months of supportive services. And we do have lots of, programs within our community that can offer those supportive services. And there's still a very great need in our community. So we actually have family unification program vouchers that are available that we could put in the hands of youth. But unless we also have those supportive services to pair with them, we're not able to do that based off of HUD regulations. And so there were two programs in Compasses, and then Community Action Board has a program called TANAV, and both of those programs right now, to my knowledge, are at full capacity. And so it's something that we're working on of trying to get more supportive services. But with having to offer those 36 months, it's a long amount of time that until we have another opening spot in those programs.
We have kids in the community, and one of the intake questions on their forms in the fall is your child homeless? And that struck me, because I hadn't seen that before. And as a teacher in another community, I don't know if my students are homeless unless they offer up that information. I don't know if they're in foster care unless they offer up that information. So there's just giant gaps, and I'm curious about how your programs work with schools, because as a teacher, I just feel unable to connect when there's just these huge, vast parts of their life that I don't know, and they just may not want to share that because they're sick of sharing it with everybody. But it also leaves me with a huge lack of information to try to help and reach out and be an additional support. So I'm just curious. And in speaking to the bouncing around in communities, like if a kid is going to a whole new community, does their education record follow them in any kind of timely manner? I'm guessing not. You know, I work in the education system, it's really slow to change. So I'm just very curious about how you guys work with schools in order to help support kids. And
I can probably speak to that one a little bit. Yeah, I can probably speak to that one too. Yeah, so I hear you for sure, and I think that is a big challenge. And actually, interestingly enough, we're working really hard right now to train all of our districts locally about how we can better identify these students. So yeah, the self-disclosing questionnaire is a great tool. Not everybody's comfortable self-disclosing, and so that's really where we're trying to kind of get in there and like, what are you noticing? Is this kiddo extra hungry? Are they coming into school in the same clothes every day? Are they noticeably tired? And that's, again, I think just the shift in schooling, and you know, thank you COVID, I hate to say it, but I think that has really helped us kind of move to more socio-emotional learning and doing those like 2x10s and taking those students and having those 2-minute conversations every day and doing more kind of trauma-informed learning. But it is really challenging, and especially with our what we call the McKinney-Vento students, because you don't always know, and they don't always know, because sometimes they're doubled up and they wouldn't necessarily know, oh, I'm not homeless, I live in a house with 20 other people, but I wouldn't necessarily know I'm homeless or I wouldn't qualify for that, you know? And so that's where we really are trying to kind of work together as a community to identify these youth and like what can we better support them with. You know, we serve a lot of alternative education students, and those kids are a lot easier to identify. They're in smaller settings, we have really close relationships with them, we're in the schools a lot. With, you know, our like Watsonville High kiddos, those are harder to find. They're in different classrooms, they're maybe not going to class, or not showing up for school. And so we're really kind of working with like the front office people, the nurse, the librarian, like kind of all these different players at a school who maybe they're leaning on more than like their teacher per se. And I think that's something we've noticed internally as our agency, that we could lean on more, and how can we better work with these kind of outlier people who aren't necessarily the teachers every day, but are seeing our kids a lot more than some other people. As far as the foster kid identification, so you should know about those. You should know about those kids.
I haven't always.
Yeah.
This year, I have, you know, it's like embedded in this whole.
And that is true, because it's like your like school information system, right? So we do, when we get a case, we get a referral. One of the first things we're doing is we're emailing the principal and the front office staff and saying, hey, just want to give you a heads up, I'm the education liaison, I'm Olivia, I'm going to be here for me, you know, when they're working with a student, and then, you know, connecting with the teacher. Again, with littler kids, it's easier. They have one teacher. With older kids, it's a little more challenging. And then, of course, there's also the confidentiality piece. And so that's always kind of that navigating that world of like, who needs to know what without knowing too much, kind of working around that. And honestly, we don't know that much either. I mean, we respect that confidentiality as well. Are you in this county? Sorry,
I teach in a different.
Okay. I'm like, 'cause if someone talks. Okay. Well, and so again, different counties work differently. But to speak to someone's question earlier about kind of the mobility piece is, you know, at least on my end, when students do move in and out of counties, we do kind of connect with their foster youth coordinator program there. They don't, not everyone has like our program. We're really lucky. We have a small number of foster youth and a large number of staff to support them. Not most counties don't have that, so they don't have that kind of proactive work together. But we will at least let the kind of the head county person know, put them on their radar, work to support getting that the transition of records. That is a legal entitlement under 8490, so that's kind of that right to immediate enrollment, right to school of origin, getting those timely records transferred. So that is something they're supposed to be doing, and that's kind of where we can also support that oversight and be like, hey, did you send that? Don't forget. Here's the timing, and lots of fact sheets. Can I send you a fact sheet of the laws? So definitely, it's not a perfect system, but that's kind of what we work to do.
And we are charged with getting those records. There's something called the Health and Education Passport. So we do have a record of where they were, you know, what credits they had, you know. So yeah, we are charged by law to keep that information.
But it is challenging. I mean, I have a high school student right now who's went to like 4 different schools, I think, in the last year, and so like trying to track down all those records. And are there any credits we can pick out of anywhere, you know? And especially like they're often behind. You know, they lose a lot of learning, lose a lot of credits, and so. In theory, yes, that's how it's supposed to go, but there's also, you know, that's kind of where we can come into the oversight of like, did we get every single little piece of that puzzle that we need, because we want to make sure that we're getting those.
Marcel, were you able to see it? It was that.
No way.
My question?
Yeah.
I didn't pack it.
Yes, right here in front.
Thank you. So I'm wearing 2 hats for this meeting, and one thing that wasn't mentioned is the higher rate of teen pregnancy and parenting for foster and ex-foster youth. And so I work in a public health nursing capacity where the state of California, the Department of Public Health, actually has extra funds for foster and ex-foster youth who become pregnant. And I say become pregnant because also we don't officially serve those without uteruses because they needed an evidence-based program, and there's this historic whole blah, blah, blah about that. So people with uteruses who are on their first baby early in their pregnancy get 2.5 years or more of case management. And it is, Joshua mentioned the one-stop shop. It's an amazing program because we're constantly dealing with everybody in this room represented and way the heck more. And then the other hat I wear is I am a CASA as well. And I absolutely love adolescence as just a journey. I'm just completely lock, stock, and barrel. I also love babies. I also love the notion of continuing to work further and further upstream. So I can't emphasize enough, whenever you hear of somebody on their first baby, look into programs for that person. Again, not because they're at risk or at promise or anything, but because all babies deserve as much support as they possibly can get in the universe. This particular program is funded because it's all kinds of evidence-based, and yes, it's a little bit more targeted toward those under the poverty line or those at promise. There's all those kind of headers to the thing. But right now, we're during COVID, we lost referrals like crazy. We're not getting the youth. And interestingly, we're getting a little bit more now of the absolutely unaccompanied youth who don't fit the foster thing, but they're 15 from Mexico or Oaxaca or Central America without any parental or long-term relationships here, or some cousin or whatever. So we are getting like this uptick in them, but they're not eligible for so many of our systemic, the FUP program and all of these things. So I just wanted to put out a tout for Nurse Family Partnership through the health department. The Thrive Hive is the closest we've got to a one-stop shop, or the family. There's 2 private family centers now, the Circle and Raíces y Cariño in Watsonville, who are doing a lot of one-stop shop stuff. There's pop-up dental, free care, all kinds of stuff. There's also the Live Oak Family Resource Center, the La Manzana. There are these places who are attempting that. They're underfunded. We all know all the best services are always underfunded. But I just wanted to really make a plug for first-time moms are eligible for a heck of a lot.
I will say I did work with that program many, many moons ago, and it was amazing. So big shout out to that. There was a checklist of the wazoo every day what this kid was supposed to be doing, and she couldn't stay with us unfortunately because we weren't licensed to have pregnant parenting teams. But it was I was so grateful to have that to pass that kiddo off to. So I will definitely give a shout out to that too.
Thank you. And I did have one question. I didn't.
A question, yes, absolutely.
Pedestal there. The golden ticket, lifelong access, housing thing, which that was about the voucher or that?
Yeah, so family unification program vouchers.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different types of vouchers in our community.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But so what makes it, cause what I wrote down was, it's time limited to 3 years, but they can get a 2-year extension, it sounds like if they jump through all the right hoops and are, you know, doing the right path, but what makes it lifelong?
So it's for the FUP youth voucher, typically it's only time limited to either the 36 months or the 5 years. But our housing authority in our community has made the decision that as long as they have additional housing choice vouchers, that they're gonna graduate people to these housing choice vouchers, and that's been starting to happen actually now. So it's just a local choice that our housing authority partners decided to do.
So what's the housing choice voucher as opposed to the FUP voucher?
I think of it as like concentric circles, so there's housing choice vouchers, and then a FUP voucher is a type of housing choice voucher, but other housing choice vouchers also exist within our community, so like there's disabled and medically vulnerable vouchers, there's emergency housing vouchers, and several others. So FUP is just one specific type of voucher that has specific eligibility criteria.
Last one, I swear. I really appreciate all of your guys' expertise, and it's so not in my realm, so thank you for sharing it. And speaking to what Joshua said in terms of like, this is just a lot to navigate, and we've been studying this as a small group for several months, and I'm still really confused about how to get people help. So in terms of like, okay, you see someone, you know someone, you have a person, who do we call? Where do we go? Like, I need it simplified for me because my brain can't hold all of this. So I'm just wondering, like, where would you point someone? Sorry.
Depends on the need. That's it. That's the short answer. Depends on what they need.
Okay.
Do they need food? Do they need mental health services? Do they need housing? Like, what is the most urgent? And I would start there.
Yeah, I would say we're not the first door. I mean, really,
Yeah.
because sometimes people can come in and there's a need, but they can't get out. And because of that, that's a part of our prevention work, that we're really trying to wrap services around families so that once that's handled, you can go in your way and not to be locked into any kind of, you know what I mean, regular court involvement, you know, for, you know, until, yeah.
For housing specifically?
Yeah, so what I would recommend you do is to go to our Housing for Health Partnership website, and there is a request for connection services, and that's the best way to get somebody connected.
Okay.
And then also to, I guess, just check in where the other places that they go and see if there's maybe somebody that's there. But I think the form is kind of the easiest way for community partners to refer.
Thank you.
Can I clarify, is that on Encompass?
No, so it's the Housing for Health Partnership is
Okay.
our local continuum of care. And for folks that's like gobbledygook, the way that I think of it is that it's a group of people that are coming together to coordinate and implement our housing system within our community. And so I think of that website as being like a central place to go and get resources and information about what's happening in the housing world, and encourage you all to sign up as members as well.
I'll also add, Housing Matters has a housing navigation workshop that's open to any community, and young people can bring a friend or an advocate or family member, whoever, with them. And so I think that's Wednesdays and Fridays now from 2 to 5, 2 to 4. And you can just show up.
I was kind of comment on the question. The other thing is 211 for any sort of general support services is a great, either online or phone. You just dial 211. I don't know if you're in Monterey County, Santa Cruz County, San Benito County, so United Way put that together. It's a massive amount of resources. You can go online and check out all the stuff they have. I think this question is for Gloria. When I think about legislation, I think about the future. Because I hear a lot of conversation about what everybody, I work in the system as well. What we've put together is a lot of information and a lot of resources in an attempt to create safety nets, band-aid some of the challenging circumstances, but they're temporary often. And what I heard over and over is reunification is the goal. So if reunification is not possible, someone turns 18, they're still family potentially. And I'm wondering if there's legislation coming down the pike, there's other additional things that child welfare is focused on to keep that connection. Because we've seen what the data tells us when kids grow up and don't have that connection.
Yeah, well, there's this thing that happens though, for youth, a lot of times they return home anyway. You know what I mean? And so, in terms of up and coming legislation, it's hard to legislate relationships, right? You know what I mean? But we are sort of going down the path of, hoping to kind of gain more community support when I think about our prevention, really creating that no wrong door. Because, again, even with the legal and relational permanence work that is, not just happening in Santa Cruz, but it's also happening statewide and nationwide, it's looking at who the youth are identifying as their chosen family, not just bio family. Like Joshua mentioned that, sometimes, family rifts or people aren't accepted for who they are and they can't really be, you know what I mean, who they identify as. That is something that, no matter what legislation is passed, we can't make people accept people. It's kind of like trying to legislate racism and, all of those sort of intersectionalities. So right now, laws change every year, child welfare, we get new legislation, we'll have about 10 or 12 to look at starting January. But,
With some money behind it?
well, of course not. But at the same time, I think we found, in even dealing with our safety organized practice, networks of support. What does that look like? And it's not, we've always pressed to do family finding, and engagement, which is one of the new things that is coming up in January. You're kind of jogging my memory about having probation and child welfare sort of share all of their efforts, around how are you looking to find family, and it's, having a plan, literally, to say, here's what we'll do for every youth in the system that's not connected. We will have all of these extensive searches and do all of these efforts. And what does that look like on the back end? What's the outcome of that? Are we making more connections though? We can do the reports. You know what I mean? We can do all the LexisNexis searches and everything else, but is that equaling support to the youth? And I think that's the piece where sometimes, just from the lens of working with the feds, that ivory tower and you will do this and here's the big decree, but the outcome of it is sometimes youth are still disconnected. And sometimes even though we may find Auntie Joni, when she looks at that child and knows that it's an extension of herself, she doesn't see herself in him and they don't see themselves in her. So we can't really support, that connection. And so, so there is some legislation that's coming out to say you will do more of this, and the dust is not settled about what that will equate. Will it impact youth homelessness? Not so sure. Yeah.
Before I call on you, anybody who hasn't spoken that wants to ask a question?
Yes, I do. I just wondered, so you had the statistics at the very beginning, and it was disproportionately high. Are those, and we might not know this, are those the same youth that you all are working with, or are those youth that have kind of slipped through the cracks and moved in from other areas and never registered and never connected, or where does that lie?
That's a great question, because for me, coming in new to the community and knowing that our transitional housing program contract that we currently have only has 8 beds, and when I look at the number of non-minor dependents that we have, and we have 100 and something, 8, if all of them needed a spot, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody can't have a transitional housing bed, and so I'm not sure, because often even the youth that come in, they are foster youth that have been placed in Santa Cruz, but they're not Santa Cruz dependents. They weren't raised in Santa Cruz, they were placed in Santa Cruz, and like I said, it's an attractive area. You know what I mean?
Does that mean that they're registered in another county and they're getting services
absolutely.
through that, even though they live here?
Yeah, and again, it's a portable kind of, yeah.
I know we at the County Office of Education, we track our data internally, so it doesn't really speak to like the outcomes of homelessness, but I know like in terms of we have pretty clear cut goals and outcomes that we track every year and look at those trends to kind of, obviously speak to what we're gonna do next year and look at that, and I wish we had more. I wish we had more on the aftercare piece, and I think that's just where maybe we can try and brainstorm how to better work together as a system to figure that out, but yeah.
And I just want to clarify where I got those statistics. So it's a combination of the PIT count, which is done here locally, and that is canvassing one day, once a year. So that's how I got, I think it was 333 youths. Now, when you go to the County of Education though, they have a different way of counting, and they count it differently. And that had a different number of youths, and that's just within the County of Santa Cruz school districts. So they're not all the same, and you bring up a great question. Did I see your hand up, Dr. Edward?
Yeah, I was just gonna comment a little bit. Lori and I work in the same department in the county, different divisions, and Alex and I work together. So we have data in the housing system, and Gloria Shop has data in the child welfare system. And when our data people match those things together, and they look at the overlap between who's in the housing system for people who are experiencing homelessness and who had, it's a pretty significant, I think it's around 40% of people who would overlap between child welfare and HMIS in a certain subset. But one of the challenges we have in the housing sector is we're aware of a lot of youth who are in unstable living situations, but they're not getting connected to our housing programs. And so Alex was alluding to this sort of outreach and connecting people into the resources that are available is part of the challenge.
So is it, I mean, and again, we might not know this, but are you thinking it's more youth that we are aware of and working on getting them services, but they're maybe not connected with everything, or there's just not housing available? Or is it more that we know that they've been in foster care or in foster care, but they're not connected with their systems at all? We have one group that's getting these amazing services, and then a whole other group that's in the homeless population that's just not.
Yeah, what Josh was saying earlier really resonates with me, having worked in different counties. There's a lot of doors in Santa Cruz, but the doors don't know the way to the other doors.
Yes.
And so just for me, it happened tonight. Your Nurse Family Partnership, they provide service, but we have housing vouchers for youth that we're not fully utilizing because we don't have enough supports for youth. But I think that we're not as connected as we could be in the programs to offer the resources that youth could really benefit from. And I think there's not enough resources. But for me on the housing side, it's kind of shameful that we have these housing vouchers for population and we can't get them to them. Every other place I worked, there were long waiting lists for the vouchers. Here we don't have a waiting list. We have a mismatch between the vouchers and the services. That feels like something we could fix if we connect with each other more, which is one of the reasons I wanted to be here.
Thank you. Jen, did I see my hand?
Yeah, I'm just curious with the age increasing of kids aging out of foster care, has that helped with the homelessness situation, or is it just postponing it?
I can't speak to the data. Anecdotally, I think it helps. I mean, for what I've seen and just in working with those youth, I can't speak to the data, but like in the youth that I've worked with and served there, they seem to sustain. Again, I think it's in the last 10 years, so we might need more time to figure that out as well. I know it's silly because 10 years is a long time, but not really in these kind of systematic changes. I don't have the data on it though, unfortunately, but just in my own personal opinion, I think it has helped.
I mean, you would think it would.
Yeah. I don't think it's a perfect solution, but I think this helps. I think it's a road to recovery, yeah.
I think too about like the pairing of services, like we were talking about these transitional housing programs that are available to non-minor dependents, and then they can transition into a family unification program voucher. And so I think the longer runway that somebody has, it takes time. It takes so much time to stabilize your housing, to be in a situation where you can actually not just survive here, but to thrive here. And I think time is a really important component of that.
And I have seen youth, or not youth, sorry, I'm using that term generically, but who have gone through that and gotten a FUB and has been really successful with that. And also, we do serve those older kiddos and they're not ready yet. Like you said, they're not ready. I'm like, oh, you want to set up a career? They're like, heck no, I'm still trying to figure out how to live. Like totally, just wait until you're ready, because I don't want them to either burn out on the higher education or career path or whatever either. And so I think that's a really solid point, is like, yeah, they're just trying to stabilize. They're not ready to take on college or a trade program or anything. They're just trying to learn how to survive. So thank you for that.
And I think that's why the model that HMIS uses is that 36 month of support services, because so often what happens, and this is speaking as a former independent living program supervisor, is that youth they get the benefit of the housing is the big thing that they need, right? They wanna be in a more independent environment, like Joshua mentioned, to sort of grow into themselves and, you know, start to make decisions for themselves and get that experience about young adulthood. The services are less attractive though. You know what I mean? The idea of meeting with a caseworker weekly, the idea about going to a workshop, which is why oftentimes they're incentivized. You know, if you come, you'll get this $50 gift card and work up to more and, you know, finish and you'll get a big certificate or you'll get a laptop or something, because we need sort of sometimes some carrots to get people in there, even though the services are what they need to kind of grow themselves to learn the skills. So if you have the housing without the services, it is a big delay. You're just delaying it. You're keeping them housed from 18 to 21, even though they're eligible for another plus, they're called a THP plus, from 21 to 23 and now up to 25. But what happens after that? Because so often other programs and jurisdictions, like if one of our youth were to, you know, go into Contra Costa County, they could get a spot, but if they're not compliant, they won't get that extended 2 years. They get exited. So then they're homeless and then they're trying to get back to Santa Cruz, right? To then tap back into the services. Yeah, so it could, for some, it will be a delay. And unfortunately, that's what happened right at the end of COVID. Youth were extended, and then they called it the cliff at December 31st. Everybody's waiting for one more extension. Youth, some of them didn't plan. They didn't want to plan, oh, you'll get an extension, you'll get an extension. They didn't extend. The state didn't extend. So 35 in my prior jurisdiction got exited to homelessness because there was no, they wouldn't plan, right? So the services do matter, right?
I think so, yeah.
You know, but you need people, because you need that person, like Nicole mentioned, when you get a flat tire at 2 a.m., who you calling? You can't call ILP, your independent living program. You know what I mean? You need somebody to call and say, hey, can you come help? You know, and that's what can be invaluable to our young people.
Yeah, another picture becoming CASA, right? Because even if a youth is in the system for 6 months or 1 year, oftentimes the relationship between the youth and their special advocate is a lifetime, right? Because I've heard so many success stories where the advocate becomes their, you know, their supporter for the long term, becomes the auntie, the uncle, the family friend, and yeah, of course it's up to the youth and the advocate both to see how that will go between them, but it is another way that folks can bridge that connection.
Kat, you were so great, share.
I just wanted to make a plug since we were talking about resources. I'm the administrative coordinator for the Santa Cruz Free Guide, and if you go to santacruzfreeguide.org, you can find a list of a bunch of different free resource lists throughout the county that include things like the Thrive Hive, and pretty soon we're going to update it to include the TAY drop-in center at the public library. In addition, we really just want to tell people to call or text us. I can give you my card. We're a small group of people, but between the handful of us, we have like 5+ decades worth of experience working in homeless services. So if we don't have the exact answer, we know the person in the county who does, and we are gonna do that work and make those connections to help you out and find specifically what is the need? Okay, this person is homeless, well, okay, what's going on here? What's really going on here? What's step one of like, what do they really need? And we really care about helping people make those connections. Yeah.
These meetings are so great. Dr. Ratner, did you want to?
Just a question about research. The programs that we heard about today came into existence because some people that I know did a research project at UC Berkeley comparing foster youth exiting at 18 without extra support and housing subsidies, and those that did, and there was a significant reduction in homelessness, better educational outcomes and employment outcomes, and the longer the runway and the longer the support, the better the outcomes. So there is research to support it,
Nice.
but it's not to the scale that we need it to really change the bigger picture, in my view.
I mean, it makes sense,
It
right?
does, right?
But it just, you want it to really make sense, right?
Wonderful. Okay, folks, so we have 4 minutes, and I really want to make sure that we honor our panelists' time. So I think we should take a moment to maybe just, if anyone wants to share a takeaway they have after tonight, anything that maybe changed perspective, feel free to do so. If I could share something, Nicole, you said something about how no one is their worst moment, right? And that was a shift for me where automatically I have an image in my head as to why someone went into foster care. And I think they're in a very terrible situation, but it really could have just been someone's worst moment.
I'm getting like teary. So that was like a really big shift for me that I think is really important. Does anybody else want to share anything that they took away from this evening?
Something just popped on the screen.
Oh, thank you.
It was
I
a
love
shot.
how you
I'll
guys
check
have
it
my
out.
back.
Joshua says by disclosing, well, Joshua, do you just want to share?
Well, I mean, because it could be answered later on, because it was just going back to the, as they were discussing about the school, and I was listening to how, you guys meet with the principal, you meet with the teachers, things of that nature. But I guess my question is by disclosing the person is in foster care, how do you prevent stigma or labeling that person, especially if they're from a marginalized community? Immediately is, foster care or foster kids unfortunately don't have good reputations. And unfortunately, given the fact that if they, let's just be honest here, if they're Black, Latino, or Black or brown skin, it doesn't help them even much more than that, depending on the location, the area that they're at, depending on their teacher, depending on their background. So by mentioning that they're foster care, is that, I guess my question really is that helpful for them, depending on if the teacher or the principal doesn't really understand what that means? Like maybe they don't have the training, maybe they don't have the background, maybe they don't have the meaning, they just have that educational background aspect of it. I mean, I'm not sure because I don't, dwell a lot in the educational system, but I can definitely, speak to experience, and a lot of people had to advocate for, also a lot of different trainings on how to do around diversity, equity, and inclusion regarding these topics because of the biases and things of that nature. So I guess I just was curious about that.
Yeah, I think we don't have time really to go through a panel discussion on this because we have 1 minute left, but I love that this is one of the closing sort of thoughts that we can all take away from this experience. And also what I'm going to take away is very similar. I really appreciated what Nicole said when we were talking about labels of at risk, with promise, at promise, and
That was Olivia, yeah.
yeah, but then bringing in youth, right?
Yeah, just you.
Just youth. So yeah, so I loved how that evolved as well. Anybody else? Okay.
I just want to share the number where you can call if you want to attend orientation to become a foster parent. And that number is 831-345-2700. You can call and ask that you want to attend an orientation.
Do you just want to confirm that number is correct on the whiteboard?
It's hard to read.
Yes.
Your markers are the worst.
Well, thank you so much. That's a wonderful piece of information for us to end on. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, and thank you.
Thank you.